This is the BBC.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, I'm Anita, Rani, and welcome to Woman's Hour from BBC Radio 4. We're going to be talking about family bust-ups, or rather, how you reconcile after one. It's being reported that Prince Charles, William, Harry and Kate all went to Frogmore Cottage and spoke for 2 hours after the funeral of Prince Philip. So how do you begin to build bridges with your family after a major falling out? Is this something you've been through? How did you go about making amends? What are the first steps, and how do you take that first step when there's a ton of anger, resentment and sadness? Whatever your background, family rifts, rows or estrangements can be very painful, sometimes lasting years, and often beyond anyone's memory of why they originally fell out. Family estrangements occur frequently across cultures and religions for a multitude of complex reasons. But what if you want to try and reconcile? What should you do? What should you consider first? And how do you make that initial approach? Well, I'm joined by Dee Holmes, family counsellor with Relate, and Mamta Saha, practising psychologist, to discuss this further. Morning to you both. Welcome to Woman's Hour. Dee, let me come to you first. If you're considering trying to reconcile, what should you think through before you even make that first step?
Hello, it's nice to be here this morning. I think you need to think about what you want to achieve, probably. And sometimes when people enter into trying to reconcile, it's because they want to sort of, prove their point and be in the right. So I think you've probably got to be approaching it with a feeling of, this isn't about who's right or who's wrong or who's won. It's actually about, let's move on from this. And I think when people are still in the space of proving their point, it's quite hard to have a reconciliation. There does, to some extent, have to be going to that phrase of drawing a line under things and moving on and saying, let's try and make it different in the future, and let's each accept our part in what's happened, even if we don't feel we're to blame. Everyone will have had a part in it.
Mamta, Dee's right, isn't she? But everybody's probably got their little bit that they want to get in just to make their point when you get back together with that person or get into a room or make that phone call. So how do you make sure you're not going to be doing that?
I think it's really important, first and foremost, to get people to check in. So, what are you thinking and how are you feeling? And being able to listen with compassion, because it's very easy in those situations for them to get heated and for one to regress, and it just ends up being as bad as it was to begin with. So really making a commitment to hearing everybody out and saying, what's going on? What are you thinking and how are you feeling? And then what you do is you get a great sense of where everybody is right now. And then I think it's very important to think about, where do we want to be as a family? What has been the thread? What has been the glue? What have been the values that have kept us together all this time, that led us to this point? And I think when you can start having those sorts of conversations, the relationships evolve and move forward.
Does the size and complexity of the family affect things, Mamta?
I'm not sure about the size. I think it's really about everybody's attitude. How is everybody, despite, whether it's a family of 3 or it's a family of 10, how's everyone showing up? Are they showing up with a willingness and the ability to, and a desire to want to be able to reconcile and move forward? I think first and foremost, individually, that's the work that everybody has to do before they come to that table to have a discussion. Mm-hmm. And then if everybody is there in that capacity, whether it's 25 people in conflict, and I've seen this in my work,
25 people in conflict.
Yeah, absolutely, in conflict, in an organizational setting. But people are people,
sure.
And it's still kind of like a family. But if everybody is there with a willingness and a capacity to want to evolve and make it work and is uncomfortable with where things are right now, I believe it's possible. But you've got to do that work yourself.
Dee, you're agreeing?
Yes, and I think also it's interesting. I agree. It's difficult to say what the size is, and it's the complexity, isn't it? But also, I often think in families, there's a rift that might go on at the adult level, and children are often quite the innocent victims in that, and they may not be aware of why there is this, or why suddenly auntie or uncle or grandma isn't on their horizon anymore. And I think that can often be quite a healing thing for families. I think often parents perhaps might be in a place to think, actually, we don't want this to go on for our children, and sometimes children, when they become adults, can break that, can't they? They can sort of say, actually, this isn't my argument and I'm fed up with all this, and I'm going to invite who I want to my wedding or whatever, and they could all just come along and let's all be together.
Yeah.
So,
Or it can go the other way, where they just take the mantle and go, well, my parents don't like your parents, and his cousin's going to carry this on. And if that is the case, if these are rifts that are historic, going back years, how do you take that first step? What do you do?
That is really difficult, I think. And I think that is, as we have been sort of saying, it is about somebody somewhere wanting to change that, and it being about that personal belief that actually enough is enough, and coming to it in a positive way. Because you're right, sometimes these carry on for generations and nobody knows where it started. They're just carrying on the mantle of it.
And just to build on Dee's point, I really think it's important to know, if you're in this situation, and we've all been in these situations where you might not have the answer and you might not be feeling okay, but you want to make it work. So just calling the elephant and saying, look, haven't got all the answers here. I'm still feeling a little bit upset or angry. But what I do know is underneath all of that, and say it in your own way, I do want to move forward, and I'd like us to move forward. And just to bring it back to children, I think children are like sponges. And if we think back to our childhood, you pick up things from people intuitively. And there's nothing more beautiful than seeing a child that, has felt that healing in rifts and relationships and seen it, because it's great education for them as well, to be able to see that people have had a fight and they might not have spoken for a while, but actually they've made friends again and things are better. If children then turn into adults and hold on to that uncle's horrible and I don't ever want to speak to him again, I think that can be quite damaging for children.
And what about a woman's role in reconciliation? Is there any evidence to suggest that women are better at building bridges than men? Dee?
I think sometimes it might be, certainly in that family context, mothers who want to make it okay for their children and to make the family a sort of, they're often the drivers of creating the family unit. And if they've come from a non-complex family into a complex one, they might well want to make sure their little unit is like the family of origin. And likewise, if they've entered this easier family, they may want to take that change. I was thinking about this before, and I was wondering if some of that is about touch, that I think sometimes it's quite hard to say the words if there's a lot to be said. And as we were saying then, things that you're not quite sure what you are going to say, but sometimes you can give someone a touch, whether it's a touch of a hand, a squeeze of a shoulder at some sort of event. And that can be something that perhaps women find easier to do than men. And so maybe that can sometimes be a first step that women might make in that situation.
Mamta, so, you've given us some good sound advice already, kind of swallow your pride. I've been making notes and kind of approach and say, you want to build bridges, that you're ready to kind of move forward, be the adult, I suppose. But once you've got there, once you've made contact, you've arranged to meet, what happens then? Do you go over old ground?
I think it's super important to think about what went wrong in the first place without blame, to say, look, when you did this, it made me feel like this. In future, can we try and do this? And so, it's almost like carving a new way forward, creating a new path forward that puts into place, without saying it explicitly so, some boundaries around, let's not let this happen again. And what I found, it personally and also professionally, is that when people have those difficult, vulnerable conversations that require heaps of courage, actually the relationship goes on to be solid and they're less likely to fall back into that place. So it's just creating a vision for how you move forward is very important.
And Dee, sometimes estrangements can be positive, can't they, or necessary for people?
Yes, that's right. I was thinking that sometimes people can't make it work, and sometimes they can feel that things in their family have been very negative for them, and that they need to break away and make a new path for themselves, and move on from negative relationships. And I think that is important to bear in mind. It is about thinking, where am I? What do I want to achieve? And actually, will I be able to achieve this? And sometimes sadly you can't. If the other people aren't willing to meet you in that place, you need to cut your losses.
And what if you've gone through everything, all the advice that you've given, Mamta, you've kind of made contact, you're there, you're willing to be open and have that conversation, but worst case scenario, it's just an absolute disaster and you end up with a worse situation than before. What do you do?
Yeah, I think you need to ask yourself a really important question, which is what's at stake if I continue to invest in this relationship that's making me feel worse? And you have to preserve your own self-care, your own self-love, and your own boundaries to protect your heart, because you can then be in a place where you're constantly trying to rectify that relationship and not making any progress. So you do need to trust your intuition and listen to yourself when it's feeling harder than it actually needs to be.
Mamta, Andy, thank you very much for speaking to us this morning. If you would like to get in touch or share your stories, maybe you're estranged from your family, you can email us via the website. And we've had a text in from someone saying, from Charlie, who says, I've experienced a mother-daughter rift with my eldest daughter, which I've been unable to mend since 2014. Well, I hope some of that advice has helped you this morning. That's all for today's Woman's Hour. Join us again next time.